Once upon a time, I lived with my son Joseph, his wife Sarah, and my sweet little grandson Ryan. After retiring, my days felt longer, lonelier. I had grown old. So old that sometimes I would forget what I was saying mid-sentence or misplace things right in front of me. My body was weak, but my heart was full of love. Sadly, Sarah treated me as a burden. She scolded me for the smallest things, and I quietly endured it all. Still, I found joy in Ryan's innocent smile. His tiny hands always reached for mine, giving me strength to endure. One chilly afternoon, Sarah gave me some money and told me to buy vegetables for dinner. As I shuffled my way to the market, my back aching and legs trembling, I saw a little girl outside a pharmacy. Tears streamed down her dirty cheeks as she pleaded with the shopkeeper for medicine. "Please, sir, my mother is dying. We don't have money." But the man coldly refused her. Something inside me broke. I knew that money wasn't much, but to her, it was life. Without thinking of the consequences, I handed her the crumpled notes and whispered, "Take care of her." As I walked back home, my mind raced. I knew Sarah would be furious, but how could I turn my back on a child in need? The moment I stepped through the door, Sarah's eyes blazed with anger. "Where are the vegetables?" she snapped. I hesitated. Joseph, hearing the commotion, asked gently, "Dad, did something happen?" Before I could explain, Sarah spat out, "Your father gave away the money. Just like that." Joseph looked at me, disappointed. "Dad, why would you do this? We're struggling too. You can't save everyone." His words cut deeper than he realized. Before I could even gather my thoughts to reply, little Ryan, my precious grandson, spoke up with a soft voice. "But Dad, my teacher says helping others is a good thing. Grandpa did the right thing, didn't he?" The room fell silent for a moment. I could see the conflict in Joseph's eyes, but Sarah immediately barked, "Quiet, Ryan. You don't understand how hard life is." My heart ached, not because of their anger, but because I never wanted to be a cause of discord in my family. I just wanted to teach kindness in a world that seemed to forget it. Days passed, and though I tried to stay out of trouble, the weight of being unwanted grew heavier. Then, one morning, as I headed to the market again, a wave of dizziness struck me. My legs gave out, and I collapsed right there on the street. People gathered around me, but no one knew me. A kind stranger picked up my phone and called home. "Your father has fainted," they told Sarah. But she didn't come. She didn't even call Joseph. I lay there, shivering, feeling as though the world had left me behind. Eventually, I managed to drag myself home, leaning against walls and lampposts. When I finally walked through the door, Sarah barely looked at me. But Ryan, oh, my sweet boy, he ran to me, hugging me tight. His warmth was like a flicker of light in my darkness. We spent many hours talking about school, about life, and about how important it was to care for others, no matter how small. I told him stories from my youth, about how kindness had saved me once when I had nothing. He listened with wide eyes, absorbing every word. Then, one day, I overheard Sarah yelling at Ryan. Her voice was sharp, filled with anger. Joseph rushed in, asking what was going on. Sarah shouted, "I gave him money for his school fees, but he didn't pay them. Where is it, Ryan?" I watched Ryan tremble, but stand tall. "Mom, there's a boy in my class. He's so poor. The school was going to kick him out, so I gave him my fee money to help." My heart swelled with pride, but Sarah's fury knew no bounds. "You're just like your grandfather," she screamed, raising her hand. Before she could hit him, Joseph stepped in, grabbing her arm. "Enough," he said firmly. "Ryan did the right thing. I'll pay his fees again." For the first time, I saw Joseph defend his son, and in a way, me too. But Sarah just glared at us both. The next day, she handed me money for the electricity bill. Her eyes narrowed. "Don't mess this up," she hissed. I took the money and left, but as I waited in line at the billing office, someone bumped into me. I didn't realize it at first, but when I reached the counter, my pocket was empty. The money was gone. Panic gripped me. How could I go home and explain this to Sarah? She would never believe me. I felt so small, like a child who had done something terribly wrong. I wandered around for a while, trying to figure out what to do, but there was no solution. Eventually, I went home, my heart pounding with fear. That night, after everyone went to sleep, I sat in my room and stared at the only thing that brought me comfort, an old photo of my late wife. I held it close, whispering, "I can't do this anymore. I'm tired, so tired." The next morning, I gathered what little courage I had left. Carrying my wife's photo in trembling hands, I went to Joseph and Sarah. My eyes filled with tears, my voice breaking, I said, "Please, take me to the old age home. I don't want to be a burden anymore." Sarah, without missing a beat, smirked and said, "Good, you should have gone there a long time ago." Joseph looked conflicted, but said nothing, so they took me there. As we arrived, I tried to stay strong, but inside, I was breaking. The thought of dying alone away from Ryan crushed my spirit. As we reached the old age home, I tried to hold back my tears, but my heart felt heavy. Joseph went to fill out the paperwork while I sat quietly, clutching my wife's picture. But then something strange happened. The manager of the home walked up to me, smiling warmly, as if we had known each other for years. "It's been a long time," he said kindly. Joseph, confused, looked at us and asked, "Dad, how do you know him?" I stayed silent, unsure if Joseph even cared about my past. But soon the truth would come out. Joseph, growing more curious, asked the staff nearby, "Does my father know the manager?" The staff member smiled and replied, "Sir, your father isn't just some helpless old man. Years ago, he helped many children here. In fact, he adopted a boy from this orphanage." Joseph's eyes widened in shock. "Adopted? Who?" he asked. The staff member gently said, "You." My son staggered back, speechless. "Your father raised you like his own flesh and blood. You were left here as a child, and he gave you a family when no one else would." Tears filled Joseph's eyes as truth sank in. Hearing those words, Joseph looked at me with a face full of guilt and pain. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he whispered. But I stayed quiet, not out of anger, but because I didn't want to remind him of a past I had chosen to forget. I had loved him like my own son, given him everything I could. As he stood there, realizing what he had done by abandoning me in an old age home, the weight of his actions seemed to crash down on him. He wiped his tears, but I knew his heart was breaking. Back home, Sarah paced restlessly, waiting for Joseph's return. When he finally walked through the door, his face pale and eyes swollen from crying, she asked coldly, "What took you so long? Did you leave him there or bury him?" Her cruel words pushed Joseph to the edge. Without warning, he turned and slapped her hard across the face. She gasped, holding her cheek in shock. "Do you even realize what you've done?" Joseph shouted. "That man you hated, that man you treated like dirt, he gave you everything. He gave me a life when I was abandoned." Sarah stumbled backward, tears welling up in her eyes. "What do you mean?" she whispered. Joseph, now trembling with emotion, said, "My father adopted me from that orphanage. I wasn't even his blood, but he raised me like his own. He gave me love, a home, a family, and what did we give him? Nothing but pain." Sarah collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. "What will happen to me now?" she cried. Joseph took a deep breath and said firmly, "You're coming with me, Lap. We're going back to bring him home. I won't let him live alone anymore." When we saw Joseph return, I didn't expect him to have Sarah and Ryan by his side. I had already accepted my fate, but then Joseph fell to his knees before me, crying like a child. "Father, please forgive me," he said, holding my hands tightly. "Come home with us. I was wrong, so wrong." I looked at Ryan, whose eyes were also filled with tears. Sarah stood quietly behind them, her head low, her eyes red. For a moment I couldn't speak. I never expected them to return. But as I looked into Joseph's eyes, I knew he meant every word. With their arms around me, we left the old age home together. For the first time in a long while, I felt wanted. Ryan clung to me tightly, as if afraid to let me go again. As we walked, Joseph kept apologizing, tears falling from his eyes. "Father, you taught me kindness, but I forgot. Ryan remembered what you taught him better than I did. Please, let me make this right." I smiled softly, holding their hands. "Family is forgiveness," I whispered, and for the first time in years, I believed it. Maybe, just maybe, things could get better. When we reached home, Ryan helped me to my chair, refusing to leave my side. Sarah brought me tea, her hands shaking as she placed it before me. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I was blind to your love and sacrifices. I treated you horribly when all you wanted was family." I looked at her, and though my heart had endured much, I said, "Sometimes it takes losing something to realize its worth. I forgive you." Tears streamed down her face as she knelt beside me. "I'll never hurt you again," she promised. "You have my word." From that day on, everything changed. Joseph became more loving and attentive, making sure I never felt unwanted. Sarah, though struggling with her guilt, began treating me with kindness and respect. She cooked my favorite meals, and we spent time together as a real family. But the one who never left my side was Ryan. He would sit by me, listening to my stories, holding my hand as if afraid I would disappear. He often said, "Grandpa, I'll always be here to take care of you." And in his innocent words, I found the hope I had lost for so long. Sometimes at night, as I sit by the window watching the stars, I think of that little girl outside the pharmacy, the one I gave my money to. Maybe she reminded me of myself, left alone in a world that can be so cold. But now I know kindness comes back to us, sometimes when we need it most. Looking at my family, I realize love can heal the deepest wounds. So if you're listening to this story, remember, never turn your back on those who love you. Parents, grandparents, they don't ask for much, just love, respect, and a little kindness.